Well, every door you've ever walked through, every cabinet you've ever opened, almost every window you've ever looked at, every screen you've ever looked at, the screen you're looking at now, every website you've ever looked at, all of these things share something in common, and that is they are all rectangular in shape. And with the web, you can get away with that a little bit. You can have a picture inset into the text, or maybe a circular picture every once in a while. But most websites are like this one, just a bunch of rectangles. And the order may be pleasing, the photos may be beautiful, but all of them are, that same shape. Now, the big difference between web design and print design, well, one is this has to be responsive these days. It's going to break into a different design depending on how wide your screen is. So here's the mobile version of this site, what that would look like. Here it is for tablet, and then it gets into full-size computer mode. But with print, with a page in InDesign, and what I'm going to show today is stuff that really cannot be done in either Photoshop or in Illustrator, is you can escape rectangles a little bit. Your page is probably still going to be rectangular shaped. There's a few books here and there that are different shapes, but almost all magazines are rectangular, almost all books are rectangular. But you can have interactions between shapes that look almost, in this case, like it's popping off the page. And you can see that this shoe is casting a shadow that seems to go onto the paper and across this other picture. You can get all these marvelous interactions with different shapes, and you can seem to escape the world of everything being rectangular when you're designing for a page in InDesign, and however that page is going to be distributed. So I am going to show you today all the techniques that were used to make this page, and I'm going to ask you to do that for this next assignment. Whoops, that's not what I want. Let me call up my InDesign. So we talked a little bit last week about text wraps, and a text wrap is just, let me bring that picture in again. And there we go. And I'm just going to fit that picture proportionally to this box with the key command option Shift E, and that just fits it into the box. But we talked about sizing pictures. So right now this picture is just on top of this text. It's covering it up. But I can create an interaction with the text using text wrap, and I showed that last week just by up here clicking on it, and that pushes the text aside. You could do that for multiple columns. It could be done, but it could be done for just one picture and part of a text frame of text. So if you have your text wrap menu, and you can get that window, I think it's just text wrap, this here, you just select it if you don't have it in your board. You can give this some buffer between the picture and the text. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to, you'll probably see these locked by default. I like to keep mine unlocked, but I'll just leave it locked now. And I can just start to click up. We have about 7 or 8 points. It depends on how you like it or not. And in this case, I like this, but this is pushed down a line further than I'd like. So that's why I like to keep them separate. So I'll just take my lower one and bring it back down a little bit. Oops, I'm not doing it. Oh, I'm still locked. Now I'm unlocked. Let's just bring that back out. And you can make this whatever you want. You could even give it a negative number, and sometimes that's useful. And so already we have a shape that's a little bit more interesting than a rectangle. This column has a brick taken out of it, and you can accomplish this on web. but already we have a little bit of a picture text interaction, and so that's kind of nice. But for the main part of this demo, I'm going to bring in the product shot that we made several weeks ago. So I'm going to say place again, and here's my after image. And I brought it into the sex frame. That's fine. Let's take the wrap off of that now. And so this is a little bit smaller than I need it, so we can just make this, keep that locked, and we could just try making this 200. See how that looks. That's pretty good for mine. You can also size it visually by choosing scale, and you have to hold down your shift key and move away from your origin point, wherever your origin point is. So in this case, it's in the corner. It could be in any corner or in the middle. And so I'm just going to hold my shift key and make that just a hair bigger. Now, this happens to be a Photoshop document, and something else that's useful to know when you're working with Photoshop documents or layered documents in InDesign is you can access those layers. So I can say object layer options, and you'll recall we made 2 drop shadows. One was of reflection, that's what we have here, but I could select the other drop shadow if I wanted it and hit preview. And so I've got that other drop shadow. I think I'm going to keep that, so I'll just say okay. So the first kind of interaction is just kind of an overlap. Now this image has a white background, and I could take that away, but I can also access the Bezier curve we made to isolate the Tilex jar from its background. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say object clipping path options, and I'll say Photoshop path, and it just comes up, and there it is. But there's something that I lost that I didn't want to lose, and that's the shadow that I just selected. So instead I'm going to say cancel, and I am going to say copy. So I'm just going to say edit, copy, and then I'm going to say paste in place. So I've got 2 copies right on top of the other one. So you can't see it, but if I were to crop this image by just pulling down the top of it, it looks like I didn't crop it because I have 2 copies of this right on top of each other. So I'm not going to crop it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to send it to back. So I'm going to object arrange, send to back. And we don't see anything changes. But now I'm going to take this top one, and I'm going to say object clipping path options. And I am going to say use Photoshop path, and there it says visible instantly because I preview checked, and then I'm going to say okay. So I now have an interaction. I'm going to hit my W key for preview so I get rid of those guidelines, which I really don't need for this project. I have an interaction between these 2 things, and I also have an interaction with this block of text. The shadow seems to be going behind it. But what I don't have is a text wrap interaction. So if I give it just this kind of text wrap, it's going to treat it like it's a, oh, I did the wrong thing. You could also give a text wrap to a text frame, which I didn't mean to do. So let's take that off. I don't want it to respond to that interaction. But now I can take this top one and I can give it, if I give it just this kind of text wrap, the usual one, it's going to treat it like a whole frame. But if I give it the second text wrap here where it looks like it's wrapping around a shape, then it is only going to respond to the clipping path I drew in Photoshop. And by the way, once I have selected that object, you can access that clipping path. You can see the points in here and you can modify them. So if I wanted to move this text a little bit out from these, I could take these points and I can move them individually, but I can also do it with the same sort of nudge buttons that we were using here. And so I'm now pushing this jar out. And so if we look at this closely, we see that there's now a nice buffer between these two things. And my shadow seems to be going behind the text. Let me just make sure I can select that other one. And if I decide that shadow is a little bit too dark, I can go to Effects and I can reduce the opacity a little bit. And because that's a different image, it's just two images on top of the other, it doesn't affect the top image. It just affects the visible part of the shadow that we see. But, so that looks pretty nice to me. But we created a problem with our headline, is that this headline is also reacting to that text wrap, and I don't want the headline to react to it. And this is something I have to mess with quite a bit. And there are a couple of ways to fix this. One, if this bottle, my product shot, and my body, my column of text here, were on the same layer, then they would, and the headline was on a different layer, then the headline would not react to it. But the way I usually do it, because I don't get into using a lot of layers when I create in InDesign, I would say Photoshop's the only program where I use more than a few. So what I usually do is I modify this text frame not to respond to the text wrap. So I'm going to go to Object, Text Frame Options. And this gives you a lot of things to do. For example, you can, as usual, align the top text to the top of the frame. That's kind of by default, but you could center it in the frame, or it could be in the bottom in the frame, or it could justify as probably more than I want to explain right now. You can also give it an inset so that if, say, this was a colored frame, say we'd given it a tint, we could give it a little space in so the letters wouldn't be right up against the edge of that, just sort of like it's sort of an internal wrap, just like the external wrap we're looking at today. But you can also do it, just say ignore text wrap. Let's just preview that to make sure it's working, and it is. So we have in this case, the text is just random from a current project I'm working on. Let me zoom out of that. Command 0, or go to View. And we can just say Fit Page in Window is what I just selected. And so we now have two kinds of interaction. Your assignment for this week is to create a print ad for your product with a headline and a little bit of text. It doesn't have to be nearly this much text, that has at least one kind of interaction between your cutout object and the text. And so you should write a headline, write a little bit of copy. You may want to throw a logo on there. I think I still have that logo. And let's just go to Object, Fitting, let's say Fill Frame, Fit Content to Frame, so it fits in the frame, and there's my little bit of logo. So again, just an ad for your product with at least one kind of interaction between the product and the text. It could have two kinds of interaction if you prefer, but it needs to have one, and just a headline, a little bit of text, and a logo for the product. And if you want to add a slogan or a like that, you can do that too, but that's optional.